Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking about you and your business. Well, you know, this weekend, we're getting to Labor Day, and so people think a lot about labor and what's going on. I'm not talking about having babies. I'm talking about work and that type of thing. And then you combine that with the fact that we're in the 50th anniversary of the Martin Luther King speech on Capitol Hill, on the mall, rather, in Washington, D.C. And, of course, a lot of that had to do with labor. Labor unions were highly represented at that speech. They're still represented today when it comes to those movements. But I frankly think they didn't get it then, and they don't get it now. And they talk about how, now one of the new narratives out there, I was reading in the Huffington Post, the narrative out there is that the average American, or rather the minimum wage today, is about $1 less in real dollars than what it was in 1963. And so if you took $1963 and put it into 2013, the reality is that it would be around $8.50 versus the $7.50 that it is now. And of course, it's the American dream of every human being to make minimum wage. And that's part of the problem, is that we aspire towards minimums rather than aspire towards success. And frankly, artificial wages, regardless of what they're set at, if they're not based on productivity and reality, they don't improve the quality of life of anyone. We know that. And so, in Russia, they tried to say a ruble. They linked to show you how low the communist and the communist era self-esteem was. They said that the ruble equaled $1, a U.S. dollar, no matter what reality told you. So people would go to Russia, get in a cab, and hand them a pair of Levi's in exchange for a really long trip, in lieu of the rubles that no one would take. And so it's kind of economics. People have to understand this stuff, and artificially raising wages and all the other bizarre things they do to try to improve the lives of workers are actually making life hell for them. And so I've got a gentleman who's been on before. I'd like to get him on, and glad to have him on again. And he's been on a few times on Labor Days. Mark Mix. He's with a group called National Right to Work, which I've been a friend of for decades. Mark, welcome to the program.
Kevin, it's good to be on with you again. Appreciate the opportunity.
So kind of real quickly, tell us what Right to Work is all about. The perception out there is that you are a big business organization, but really you represent workers too, don't you?
Absolutely, Kevin. And the right to work principle is really very, very simple. It's a basic issue of liberty, a basic issue of freedom. We believe the right to work principle is, and the 24 states that have it at this point, believe that every worker must have the right to join a union. They can associate with unions. They can do whatever they want. They can support them voluntarily. But we believe that no worker should be compelled as a condition of employment to join or pay fees to a union just to get a job. That's basic individual freedom. It's a freedom that I think empowers workers and empowers unions if they address it and adopt it. They are held accountable, just like you and I are in the marketplace. If we don't provide good service, or in your case, don't provide good radio, people don't listen. If people don't listen, you don't get your advertisers. If people don't advertise, I don't have to go any farther.
Yeah. Don't raise people's expectations too high. Good radio. I haven't done that in years. What are you talking about? But I keep trying. But absolutely, you're right. And you see, this should be an engagement between the employer and the employee, and all these third parties involved. All they end up doing is brokering these jobs away, don't they?
That's right, and particularly when you give this third-party governmental privilege to force themselves onto workers who never asked for, never wanted, and never voted for them. To allow them to have this compulsory unionism power that's existed in America since 1935 is really an anathema to who we are in this grand experiment of individual freedom and self-government. It just doesn't make any sense.
No, not at all. So what is the state of labor today?
Well, I think they're in trouble. I mean, Richard Trumka finally, the president of the AFL-CIO, finally admitted this. He said that, we've got to go out and partner with more progressive, liberal, socialist organizations to enhance the, quote, value of organized labor in America. I think that's the wrong recipe, but they're going to have a lot of soul-searching to do in their biennial or quadrennial convention that's going to occur here in, I think, the second week of September. They've admitted that, they're losing perspective when it comes to workers across America. They only represent about 6.5% of the private sector workforce, but yet they have this government power. And so by being a ward of the state, by being a recipient of this power, they're more interested in what happens in Washington and Austin and state capitals around the country than what happens on the workplace floor. And we would suggest Get out of the business of compulsion, get in the business of representing workers, and I think you'll begin to solve the problems of, quote, organized labor in America.
Yeah. And so Ronald Reagan may have put it best, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. and you see that all the time in the labor front, don't you?
That's right. It is really, and it was Samuel Gompers, the founder, the so-called founder of the AFL and the labor movement in America back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that, he said this openly to the trade union movement, and at that time it was guilds and other things, but he said, the workers of America adhere to voluntary institutions. Anything else is a menace to their rights. And so when they decided they were going to try to go to government to get government power to force workers into these collectives and these monopoly groups, they actually did damage to what, left to its own devices, where they provide services to workers and hold themselves accountable, would have been, as Gomper said, is unbreakable when you join together voluntarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question about it. And it really is kind of a frightening state of affairs. So what's interesting to me is that the labor movement as a movement, and maybe I'm misreading it, it's become a little bit more subtle rather than being an overt, maybe self-serving. What they have done is they just kind of incorporated themselves into other political movements in order to push their agendas. Do you see that too?
Absolutely, Kevin, and that, Trump has publicly stated that now, that, somehow by partnering with the Sierra Club, that's good for those workers that are in the United Mine Workers Union or the operating engineers who now can't get jobs in the Keystone Pipeline. I don't understand what Trump is thinking here, and I guess there's an inherent conflict. I guess he would say that, the good of the many outweighs the good of the one. But in the case of a union, when they have the power to force you into their collective and force you to pay money to be forced into that collective, how is it that, Trump seems to think that the AFL-CIO has got to increase its relationship with all these outside groups? And, we're seeing it, I guess we'll see it in September as these community organizing groups get together and have strikes in the fast food industry and lobby for health care. Organized labor was one of the biggest proponents of Obamacare. Now they're one of the biggest voices against it.
They finally read it. Wait a minute. We're going to have the same health care as the unemployed have? What?
Yeah, it really is amazing, and it's frustrating from our perspective to think that these compulsory dues dollars, what we have now estimated to be about $1.7 billion in politics and lobbying over the last 2 years, comes off the backs of hardworking men and women who are going to have their health care, basically destroyed by an organization that claims to represent them, that was the largest and probably the loudest proponent of Obamacare in the country.
Okay, we're going to run out of time, and I have so much to ask. I'm, interested. Are you saying that this hasn't been effective for them to become more almost subversive? I think it's been incredibly effective, personally.
Yeah, well, it's amazing. They have decided they've got to partner up with these groups that really don't have the interest of their so-called the union members in mind when it comes.
Well, I'm not saying but have they ever had the interest of their union members in mind?
Well, I hope that they have. I mean, certainly the union officials in the right-to-work states who are now held accountable for their actions by workers who can choose whether or not to financially support them, they are held accountable, like in states like Texas.
But that is by coercion, not by voluntarism. That they didn't volunteer for that, did they?
No, absolutely they didn't. And
they wanted compulsion. They wanted coercion. They wanted to do the compulsion and the coercion.
Yeah, that's right. And in the 24 states that have passed right-to-work laws now, there's a new standard for them, and that is a standard. Look, if we're going to pay you money, you need to provide services to us and get out of all this other stuff you're doing.
So these same, it's not somewhat the unions, but I think about the Democratic Party who sold out completely on the amnesty bill, and they want to give amnesty to untold millions over time. Clearly, that's what this thing will sketch out. People keep on wanting to only deal with the here and now, but this thing has effects for years to come, which will essentially steal untold numbers of jobs from blacks in particular. What's up with the blacks and their relationship with the government that comes to this type of thing? And frankly, it hurts labor unions as well.
Yeah. Absolutely, and the fact is that organized labor has decided that particular group of folks that they are going to provide this amnesty to is going to be a fertile crop of potential union members and forced dues paying fee payers, and I don't think that's a very good business model, frankly.
Yeah, and again, it serves the union, but not the people the union serves.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Such myopia. By the way, you can use that. That's a good one-liner. All right. Always love to have you on the program. How do you encourage people to get more information?
Well, Kevin, they can find out information about our group at nrtw.org. That comes with those 3 W's, I guess, in front. You got to put that in there, I suppose. But nrtw.org is a good way to find out more information about right to work.
nrtw.org is for the National Right to Work. It is really advocating for the worker in a way that the unions could never dream. Frankly, I love this organization. I've been familiar with it since the late 1970s. How old are you guys, anyway?
Well, the committee was founded in 1955. The foundation
way before I was born, or not way, but enough.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Great work. Keep it up, Mark.
Thanks, Kevin.
When we come back, much more for you. I do want to remind you the best content here. It shows up over there at usdailyreview.com. While there, like it on Facebook, and make sure you follow it on Twitter.